Why is that the site of announcing high concentration of the zinc? Yeah, so we only figured that out as we began doing the time courses. And in the beginning, the polar body did not stain with the zinc probe. But as the zinc started being released, then the polar body would start to glow, and then it finally goes out. So what we think is going on, we know that the polar body goes through membrane permeabilization state as it begins now to do the equivalent of apoptosis. I mean, it's not done taking much cytosol with it, cytoplasm with it, and it's starting to degrade the chromatin. And so we think that membrane polarization has allowed the zinc and the zinc probe again, and then as the zinc then washes out of the system, then it started to go off. So, but it's a great question. It was my favorite part of the cell process was the trash. Yeah. So zinc plays such a critical role in the fertilization. Is the physiological level of the zinc is good enough during the stage of fertilization in a moment? So it's an excellent question, and I didn't mention the work of Professor Diaz. I had his name on one of the slides on the worm, and he's just published a very beautiful paper on the zinc and the worm. Greg, we agree with all his conclusions. He had shown several years before that, in fact, with a zinc acute zinc deprivation, or even a very narrow window, shut down oogenesis and it shut down ovulation. And so it's clear that the whole system is set up to be ready to acquire zinc, and if that zinc isn't available, a go-no-go decision gets made. So I think zinc literature is probably going to be very important. It helps get no data on nutritional supplements. I don't want to advocate taking a bunch of zinc to get pregnant because you'll become copper negative if you overdo it. But I would argue that we probably shouldn't have women taking these big neonatal vitamins that are trying to offset anemia in a pregnant woman, because the iron overload could actually be causing misloading of iron into the egg when zinc is being looked for. So I think there's some really important implications that need a lot of looking at. In terms of it looks like the calcium activation is critical from muscle cells, right? Even the truncating iron cells you mentioned. So you think in all these cases zinc is working, or considering the large concentration as the zinc is working, is it carrying a lot of some of the other chaperones and other things? Because that will be much more energy consuming and also slowing the process of build-up. So I think that there's different roles for zinc fluxes at each stage in the cell cycle. And so I think we have to be careful not to map and say the zinc does this. It's going to do something different at each stage. I do think that other metals can get pulled along. I think the chemistry of zinc and calcium is distinct enough that those two are going to be very hard to overload or misinterpret this chemical signal. And I think that's one of the reasons biology is employed two metals that are very far apart in their chemistry. So I think you're on the right path. I think copper, cadmium, lead, we know that growing organisms are extremely sensitive to heavy metal poisoning. We suspect that those metals can sneak into the egg if they're in the bloodstream when an egg is starting to go through the zinc accumulation. And if that happens, they carry a toxic burden in each subsequent cell division, so it can be really disastrous. One last question.
Great. Now, my question is actually on copper, and more specifically copper chaperones. So in terms of specific copper chaperones and specific copper proteins in different compartments, how do you think the cell decides which copper protein to get the copper? So is it regulating the copper chaperone level, affinity, or concentration, expression level, or whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think it's still a little too early to know. The thermodynamics of these different copper binding sites and different chaperones have been measured by the Bersini group and other groups around the world. And there seems to be a hierarchy that you get copper first in the copper chaperone for superoxide dismutase, and then a lower affinity of the ATX1 protein. But we just don't yet have enough data to know how that decision of allocation gets made. And in fact, today, no one's shown the docking of the chaperone with the importer, which would be another place for discrimination and a prioritization. But I think you're asking exactly the right question. How does the cell prioritize allocation of a limited resource that in the copper economy and the zinc economy when times get tough? And it's not unlike the question that people at MIT and have to answer when funding gets lower, is how do you allocate it under pressure conditions? And it's never an easy decision, but hopefully we can learn something from the way the chaperones work to help you with your job. So it looks like we get a very good way to start. And I want to invite everybody for the reception of the library. Thank you. As you know, this is our last lecture for 2016 at TRACO. And I'd like to acknowledge Jonathan Ruiz for providing financial support for the course, especially the video cast, and Anthony Thomas here in Building 50, as well as Chris Graham and Cedric for setting everything up for the video cast. And our speaker today, our first speaker is Kurt Harris. He got his MD degree from the University of Kansas, and he did a residency at UCLA, and he's been at NCI, he says, for over 40 years. So he's chief of the Laboratory of Human Carcinogenesis. His title, Lung Cancer Precision Medicine Strategy. Take it away, Kurt.
Thanks, Jared. Good to be here again. And I want to thank Terry for managing the source for quite a number of years, and it's been quite an important one. So I think we all appreciate it. So let's proceed. All right, precision medicine and lung cancer. I'm sure everyone in this room and on the video cast understands that the main cause of lung cancer is cigarette smoking. And in fact, there's been somewhat of a decline in the incidence of lung cancer in males and maybe in females. But over the last 50 years, from the Surgeon General report, which I and a number of people contributed to, there's been more than 20,000 premature deaths associated with smoking. And that includes cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, and of course cancer. So in terms of cancer prevention, anti-smoking efforts are probably the most effective in terms of decreasing the number of deaths of cancer. Now, while smoking has gone down in the United States, that's not true in other parts of the world, here in Chile and especially in Asia and the Soviet Union and parts of Europe, in which smoking is still very high, in some cases around 50 to 60% of the populace. So lung cancer is going to be around for quite some time. It's obviously the most lethal type of cancer worldwide, and that's followed by liver, colorectal, breast, and some of the others. And one of the reasons I studied lung cancer for quite a number of years is the fact that it is the most lethal and the most challenging in terms of therapy. But there's some hope, and that includes identifying people who are at early stage lung cancer. And I'll be talking about low-dose CT and the use of that screening strategy. And there are people who are at risk are obviously smokers, and one of the objectives is to identify people in this category, there's about 10 million of them in the United States, who need priority screening by low-dose CT. And I'll tell you about why that is the case and something about this kind of test. And so there's a need for screening biomarkers of lung cancer risk. There's also once the tumor has been identified, is it cancer, is it not cancer? And that means that one needs diagnostic markers. And then once it's surgically removed, some of these people will have recurrence. And I'll talk about that and how can you identify those people who will have a high probability of recurrence versus those who will not. Those are prognostic biomarkers. So the new initiative in precision medicine goes back just a few years now. It was, I think, really stimulated by a review by the Institute of Medicine, which was entitled Precision Medicine, which I'll get to in a moment. It was announced by the President Obama in his State of the Union message, and then this is an editorial written by Francis Collins, director of the NIH, and Harold Varmus, who was at that point director of the NCI. So the traditional kind of medicine, the kind of medicine that I learned and actually practiced early on, was that one does an interview with the patient, and I guess you would call it a client today, and get a medical history, and then do a physical examination, and then do some standard laboratory tests, develop a differential diagnosis, and then a treatment or exploratory procedure. Well, precision medicine is multi-layered, it's individual-centric, and it's interconnected, and it uses information common with the experience of many things built upon the basic clinical information and epidemiological information. And I'll go through this in more detail. So in this report that came out of the National Research Council in 2011, the information commons include the expososome, which I'll talk about, the genome, the metabolome, epigenome, transcriptome, microbiome, and then the clinical information. And this is utilized to develop a knowledge network and a new molecular taxonomic classification of individual patients. And the objective is to improve clinical medicine, diagnosis, healthcare, treatment, and with the feedback going to the information commons of observational and clinical studies. So it's also informed by medical research, and the feedback loop is informed mechanistic studies. And then something that was not included in the original strategy was cancer prevention and to guide preventive research. So let's first start with the expososome. It was coined by the now director of the International Agency for Research on Cancer, Chris Wild. And when you think of exposure, normally you would think of just the internal environment, tobacco smoke, infectious diet, food toxins, radiation. But his concept was it was also the internal environment that's directly related to the external environment. For example, obesity, chronic inflammation, which I'll talk about. And these together can lead to cancer biomarkers at risk and prognosis, and finally cancer prevention and screening strategies. The cancer genome and epigenome, the genetic susceptibility, of course, driver genes that are important for targeting for therapy, but the understanding of preferences also feeds into this paradigm. Many cancers are caused by chemical agents, way back kidney squeeze and scrotal cancer, which is pyrene, or aflatoxin, which is from a toxin from a fungus, Aspergillus flavus, that causes liver cancer, and cigarette smoke. It's more than 60 different chemical carcinogens that cause lung cancer and other cancer types. Now, in some cases, these specific carcinogens cause specific mutations in the p53 gene, which I'll talk about in more detail. Aflatoxin, liver cancer, G to T transversions, had a different site, 249 mutations. That was the very first one described by myself and others. And then polycyclic hydrocarbons, such as pyrene, smoking, and lung cancer. There are multiple hotspots, mutations, but they're all G to T with strand bias. Ultraviolet light, which was shown by Doug Brash from my postdocs to cause CC to ET transitions, and particularly at these two sites more recently, this is a toxin that causes kidney failure and also kidney tumors and causes AT strand biases. Now, the most common mutated cancer in all mutated gene in all cancer, of course, is the p53 gene, which is shown here in blue, and for example, ovarian cancer is close to 95%. So, of all the various genes that are mutated, p53 is the most common. And p53 is a tumor suppressor gene, but the mutants come in several different types. They're loss of function mutants, so they lose the ability to tap to the tumor suppressor by multiple ways. But in some cases, these mutations lead to gain of function as an oncogene. So the p53 gene and its product changes from a tumor suppressor to an oncogene. And does this have consequences? The answer is yes. In multiple cancer types, gain of function p53 mutations are associated with poor prognosis, including lung cancer. So this is a line in red. This is patient survival, 100%, 0%. This is time in months, so this is a 5-year point. So there's a high significance compared to the wild type p53 or the non-gain of function p53. And this is true in many, many different types of cancer. Now, as I mentioned earlier, one of the concepts that Chris Wild had with the chromosomes that was linked to infection and chronic inflammation. Now, chronic inflammation can be either largely inherited, such as hemochromatosis and iron overload disease, liver cancer, and inflammatory bowel disease, partially related to inherited and familiar pancreatitis and pancreatic cancers. So the former president, his family, has high incidence of pancreatic cancer due to pancreatitis. Fortunately, he did not. He's still in his 90s, but he's actually doing pretty well with his metastatic melanoma at point. But more frequently, the infection is inherited, acquired, such as viruses, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, or bacteria, such as Helicobacter, or parasitic infections, such as shown here. And there's about 2 million people per year that are related to various infections from the WHO report of a few years ago. But then there's another group of non-communicable diseases in addition that increase the risk of cancer and also chronic inflammation. And these include acid reflux, esophageal cancer, Barrett's esophagus, obesity for multiple types of cancer, and smoking, which, as I said earlier, has access to liver carcinogens, which is brew carcinogen. It's also a very potent inflammatory agent. And anyone who's inhaled the first part of a cigarette realizes how toxic it is. And if it wasn't for nicotine, I don't think anyone would be smoking cigarettes. So if you add these to non-communicable diseases, it's well over 6 million cancers per year worldwide. So there are various biomarkers that are associated with hospital therapy and increased risk. The study we did a few years ago, the prospective study, in which we measured various inflammatory agents in the serum, and IL-8 and CRP, the C-reactive protein, were elevated even 5 to 8 years prior to the development of lung cancer and are various obvious risk predictors. At the time of cancer, serum IL-8 or IL-6, both in African American and European Americans, are elevated, and these pro-inflammatory agents, such as the interleukin-1 beta and the anti-inflammatory IL-10, in African Americans is elevated. And finally, in terms of survival and prognosis, high levels of IL-6 and IL-8 are associated with poor survival. I'll show you that in a moment. Adenosine lectin-2, which is a genetic inheritance of haplotype that leads to hyperreactive innate immunity, is associated with poor survival. TNF-alpha, so hyperchloride agent, and anti-inflammatory cytokines in well are high in African Americans. So there's a difference between African Americans and European Americans in some of these responses that are primarily related to inflammation. So I mentioned that IL-6 and IL-8 were prognostic classifiers. In this case, there's a study we did a few years ago showing that even the earliest stage of lung cancer, that's stage 1A, 3 centimeters or less, if neither one of these inflammatory cytokines are elevated, the prognosis is really quite good. If one is out of the two is elevated, it's intermediate. But if both are elevated, then in between 5 and 10 year period, 75% of the people are dead. 100% survival, 0% survival, 5 years, 10 years, 15. So even though there's a surgical intent of cure, there's a population of people who already have micrometastases. Now, passive smoking. This is a watercolor that was actually painted by Professor Hariyama, who was an epidemiologist from Japan. And there was a meeting in 1981 in Greece at Keystonian in which he presented his data for the very first time that passive smoking increased the risk of lung cancer. At that time, not very many people believed it. But since then, there's been 50 to 80 different papers that have shown in multiple populations, multiple conditions, that passive smoking also is a risk factor. And I sort of like the flowery language of Hippocrates, in which he wrote, some men have constitutions that are like the wonderful, the wooded mountains running with springs, others like those with poor soil and little water, still others like land rich in pastures and marshes, and yet others with the dry earth of the plain. Even at this time, many centuries ago, physicians recognized that people were different from each other, and that they had some conditions that led them to have poor survival than others. So I was sitting at that meeting listening to Hariyama, and that was in 81. And I thought, well, I think I know the kind of study I want to do. And it was the following: to look at never smokers who develop lung cancer and ask the question of whether or not their parents smoked. But in 1981, it was much too early to do those studies, partly because women didn't start smoking until the Second World War with any frequency. And secondly, in most questionnaires, that was not asked whether or not your parents smoked. So I went back, I took it back here, and added those kinds of questions and others to our epidemiological case control study. And many years later, Susan joined us for a couple of years, and this was 2009. And so we could test that hypothesis. And we found that childhood exposure to secondhand smoke and genetic conditions and innate immunity increased lung cancer risk in never smoking adults. And the smoking of either parent was important and additive, and even grandparents who took care of the kids that they smoked, it contributed to the increased risk. And this was done in 2 different cohorts. So the conclusion was that, that's the hypothesis, the conclusion was that parental secondhand smoke exposure during childhood associated with a dose-dependent increase in lung cancer risk among never smokers in a Mayo Clinic cohort in 1 year in the United States, especially those who had a adenosine lectin type 2 haplotype and were hyper-reactive innate immune system. And one of the surprising results that we found was that these never smokers who had exposure from their mom and their dad at an early age, they developed lung cancer in their 50s instead of their 60s or 70s. So in many kinds of studies, children are a susceptible population, and it's true in smoking-induced lung cancer. So now let's go to the genome. So this is a traditional view when Jerry and I were initially doing lung cancer research, the small cell adenoid squamous, and then in 87, KRAS was found in oncogene, and then in 2004, there were a number of other genes found, particularly EGFR. I want to remind you that P53 mutation has been known throughout this time. And then in 2014, a number of protein kinases were found to be mutated in some cases, such as ALK fusions, but these were only essentially in never smokers. So it's sort of misleading with this increase in these various genes because they rarely occur in smokers who develop lung cancer. Now, what was exciting at the time, and it's still very interesting, was that these could be targeted. So there are a number of different drugs that were developed, and and they're in the 3rd or 4th generation of many of these drugs now. The satisfying thing was that there were complete responses in which many tumors just melted away. However, within a month or 2, they came back. So they were quite temporary, and these drugs cost about $150,000 a year. So it's economic work on these people. That's That's the reality of it. The situation. Now, let me turn to the transcript, though, and